Reading groups versus whole class instruction. Does it really matter? What do you think? Yes, otherwise we wouldn't have the session and you could all leave. It does matter, and by the end of this session, I'm hoping you'll leave with, oh, I can do that. It's not overwhelming. I know why now, because I've seen the research, because I have the research, and just some little methods of how to run the classroom and things. I think you'll find that at the very end, you'll feel like, I can do this. This is not going to overwhelm me. And even welcome you, those of you out in virtual land. I hope this will help you just as much. I have lots of fun friends in here, and so if you have questions, or those in virtual land especially, you'll be typing those in. But those of you here, you'll have either at the last few minutes you can ask questions, or even during the time. I don't mind if you interrupt me. So glad you're here. I'm Becky Terrell, and I'm a national consultant for BJU Press. But before I worked for BJU Press, I've been with them 2.5 years. I taught in the classroom for years, full time. So been there, done that. What I tell you today is what I've done. It works. I know it. I've had all the classes. I've had teachers say, well, I mean, that's good for you, but you don't know my class. Let me tell you, I do know your class because I've had them all. I've had big classes. I've had not so big classes. I've had all the parents. I mean, and so it does work. It does work, and I hope that this will help you just say, oh, okay, I can do this. And really, if you're using BJU Press, especially if it'll be your first time this year, try to follow what we would love for you to do, because that'll help you. When you try to squish us into another way, it doesn't always work well. So this will help you just see, okay, this is how it should be done, and so on. I have 4 children as well, and because they were close together, I kind of felt like I got my degree several times, because I was a pretty intense mom. And so I knew all of what they were doing, and they all used BJU Press exclusively all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade. So I'm pretty passionate about BJU Press, but I think rightly so, because I've seen the results. And so if you're like, okay, calm down, you're a little too passionate. It's true though, it's from my heart, and I'm pretty honest, so you'll notice that. All right, so let's get started, and let's talk about the reading groups versus whole class instruction. What's out there in all the research. All right, the top 2 reading myths, and somehow, let me just get this going on here. It's not advancing, so let's try to see if it'll advance that way. There you go. The top 2 reading myths. Learning to read is a natural process, and children will eventually learn to read if given enough time. What are those myths? It's not true. I know you have the outlier, the child who the parent says basically they were born reading. They just, they've been reading since forever, and you're smiling like, okay, what are they actually probably doing? They're decoding, right? They're saying words. And I always say it's great for grandma that you can say 100 words in 3 minutes, yay. But do you understand what you're reading, what you're decoding? If you don't, then you're not reading, okay? So that's why it does matter how they're taught, and I love BJU Press's method there. So I get this email. I've got a lot, as you know, as teachers, you get a lot of these, and notes and things like this. And I only put this up to show you, it's not like, oh, you're amazing, wow. I used BJU Press. I got to know this child. She came into 2nd grade, struggled with reading, and her mom was quite worried about her and said, I don't know if she's going to be okay, and so on and so forth. This was October. And the mom was like, wow, she's already doing so well. By May, she was doing great. And really one of my top readers. Our program works, right? I got to know her. I had that trust with the child. I got to know what made her. She wasn't just one of all my students, right? And I really connected with her. And I hope that's your goal, not just for reading, although it's important for reading, but just to get to know your students so that they're motivated. They want to go to school. I always was worried that my students, any of them, would say, I used to love to go to school until I was in Mrs. Terrell's class, and now it's so boring. I was so dreading of that I made sure it was fun all the time, or exciting, or just full of life, because they have to be in school for many, many years, right? Especially when you teach lower elementary. So you want them to want to come to school, to be excited. And what subject is more important than reading? right? To say that, well, I mean, you know, we do a bit of reading in our class, but we're really more into the, whatever it is, STEM and science and all that. But you can't be lifelong learners if you're not reading well. And the point is we want your students to be lifelong learners, right? So make reading a big priority of your day. Make it a fun part of your day. Make it exciting. And I think BJU Press really helps make that easier because the stories are interesting and engaging and fun. And you make it that way as well. Now, the story by itself is fine, but you're excited if the story is about the farm. You're going to show a video about the farm and maybe have a farmer come in or something because you want them to want to read, right? And that's what our whole goal is here. The typical class is composed of students with varying levels of reading ability and varying rates of learning. These differences are best dealt with through some form of grouping. Okay, the research is out there. So let's say you say, well, I mean, my whole class is the same level this year. Can you imagine, first of all? But let's say they're all just, you know, average. And so I don't need to group. Yes, you do. Why? Yes. Well, that's true, especially if they come in and you think that's true. You need to group because you need that time with them. So let's say I have a class of 25 students, right? How many are going to get to answer a question in my reading time? I mean, if I'm good, 25, maybe, I don't think so. But if I have divided you and I have maybe 8, and I just have a few right here, and I'm going to ask you a question and you a question, I'm going to ask all of y'all a question, but I'll get to ask you maybe 2 or maybe 3, just because of how it works. Well, now I'm already getting to know you better, and you're having a chance to respond, right? So even if your whole class is the same, you know, ability, which I know that doesn't happen, you still should group, just for all these different reasons, right? So just the practical side, if no other reason. Dividing the class into smaller groups allows each student to participate more fully, and that's what we're talking about. So what about oral reading, right? You have 25 students. I often had a class of 24, 25, and I want them all to orally read. Well, we might as well start at 8 in the morning, and by 2, hopefully we're done, you know, just because you don't have time. So then you have a smaller group, so everyone gets to read maybe a sentence or 2, and then a couple paragraphs or something like that. But they all, most days, get to read a little bit. And that's the whole point of grouping. It's not always just the scientific part, it's just the practical part. And I think that's just kind of speaks for itself. David Pearson does a lot of talking about webinars, about writing about groups. And this of course is a small sentence out of all this melted down here, but without small groups, very few students reach the bar. And that's, I think, because it comes back to you have more time with them, to work with them, and so on. Well, how do you group? And I was talking to one of you earlier about that. How do you group at the beginning of the year? These are some practical tips, ways I did it. You can, you are you in the classroom because of you are who makes up your class. So you might have to change things up a little bit or change things a little differently. But how did I group, and what are some ideas for you? At the beginning of the year, I would bring them back a few at a time in kind of a group, but not really. It's not like that's going to be their group, but just in a few of them at a time. And the others are doing occupied with things that we're going to talk about. But I'm bringing them back to me, and I'm going to have them read a little bit here and there. Okay? I'm starting to take notes. Okay then, right? Or wow, right? So you're kind of, because you might have a preconceived something in your head. We kind of all do that. But in the end, it's like, I need to see really how they're doing, right? So I'm going to write down notes. Review reading reports from last year. But don't just do that because students go both ways in the summer. Have you noticed that? In our area, a lot of people got tutors in the summer. So what they had in the reading report last year, actually, they had improved. And I remember when my first year's back teaching full-time, I went next door to the teacher and I said, are we supposed to lie on the reading reports? And she's like, no, why? And I said, because this isn't the student I have. And she said, well, that's because, you know, the parent got a tutor and whatever. Because I couldn't, so the reading reports are good, but also, you know, just so you know, they're not always as accurate as you think they might be. So look at them, but don't just, well, that's the group they were in last year, guess I'll do the same thing. But they might not work there. Does that make sense? So administer an informal placement evaluation. We call them IPEs. We have them in our product. It's just they're reading a story, they're answering questions, just to kind of get their comprehension, see how they're doing. So there's 3 parts here, but it's not an exact science. Don't feel like, but I don't know. I mean, I have 10 that could go in the top group. I only have 5 in the middle group. Put 2 from the top group in the middle group. The point is to be in a group, right? It doesn't really matter. It's not that detailed. The point is to be with you, to have more time with you, to get more questions answered, to read orally more. So in the end, it's not, don't sweat about it. And they're fluid. It's actually okay after quarter 1, you're like, whoa, Tommy has improved so much, I'm actually going to move him on up. Or the other side of the coin, Susie's really struggling. I may have to pull her back a little bit. Do you know what I mean? So it's okay to be fluid. And they don't have to, I say quarter because if you watch or have already seen my reading assessment presentation, we do kind of grade by quarters, so it's easier just for my own sake, it's easier to wait for quarters, but you don't have to, okay? So those are the 3. It's not an exact science, okay? Just don't get too stressed about that. But they're in a group, and let's start there. Okay, so let's do some more talking about that. In the lower elementary, you do look a lot at their phonics, right? Because they should have a good understanding of that. What is their oral fluency like? How is it flowing? Are they still reading robotically, right? Or are they starting to flow? Those are things you do notice, especially in the lower elementary. But in the upper elementary, you could have somebody, this actually just someone, a teacher told me about this student the other day, so this fascinates me, but you could have this. Their student was in 5th grade, or is in 5th grade, and they can read like out loud, really decoding. They can decode like nobody's business. They have the inflection, they're beautiful oral decoders. They have no idea what they're reading. So the comprehension isn't there. So this is 5th grade, so they're already thinking, yikes. We need to really back off on that part of it and really work on the comprehension, because orally reading is not helpful if you don't know what you're reading, right? So that's sometimes what you look for more in the upper, and sometimes you have a slower reader. My sister will say that. She's a slower reader, but she's so smart, she just reads slower. So she might be in a different group. But it's not because it's ability, it's just more how it flows, because students are not very patient with each other. So if they're in a group where they're done, lickety split, and the other group is, you know, the other person's going quite slowly, they're going to be like that. So you just divide that way. Mix your groups up occasionally if you want to, just because why not? And do you ever do whole group? I did about once a week, okay? I did, because why not change things up? I'm easily bored. I hate being bored. I do. I think I have a big fear of boredom. So I didn't want things to get boring in my class, and so I would change things up once a week. Often on Wednesday. For me, it was just middle of the week change. My last year teaching, I did not have any breaks on Friday, as in I was on early duty and Carline duty and lunch duty, and we had no music art type classes that day, so that was my whole group day because I just needed a break. So you do what you were. You don't have to do a whole group, but I'm saying it's not like I don't mean to never do whole group, but that would be more, I would do a poem, right? You know how there's poems, and sometimes I feel like you don't necessarily need to do poems during little group times. You can, but I didn't. So sometimes change things up a little bit like that. Good classroom management. All right. Now, when I say this quote, that does not mean that, well, I don't have good classroom management, then I guess I won't do groups. No. The point is to have good classroom management so you can do groups. I actually had a teacher say that, well, that's good for you, but I can't, my classroom, isn't managed well. Well, then manage it well. That's a whole nother conversation. But you do have to have good classroom management. You can't have helter-skelter, willy-nilly, chaos running around your class. They have to be in order, and you just practice it, right? You make a schedule. You have a certain area. Mine was in the corner. They were all kind of hidden around with things and filing cabinets and things, but I could see the rest of the class. I think no one has better peripheral vision than teachers, right? It's like you can see sideways, and I knew what was going on here. I knew what was, I was all over the place. So you need to have all that going on. And then this part where it says establish routine behaviors. Once you practice it, and they know the flow at the beginning of the year, do it one more time. You know how it is with your children, if you have children or you had them when they were little, you think they got it and they really don't, so you have to do it one more time. So with reading, you might just, the groups and things, let's flow one more time, boys and girls, and figure out how this is gonna, right? And so we're gonna practice it a little bit more because they should not be able to interrupt you. They should not be able to interrupt you during reading time. Between groups, of course, you're not off limits for hours. But my students, I told them that unless their head fell off or there was blood, they could not bother me during reading time. And shockingly enough, no one's head ever fell off. But I taught second grade. How many of you teach second grade? There's a lot of blood in second grade. Everyone's teeth fall out all at once, and they're like this coming back to you, and there's, it's hanging on the edge, and there's blood, and you're like, of course it happened during reading time, right? So that did happen. I'm not saying I was never going to let them come, but they couldn't come to tell me that their knee was itchy or, all the things. So you have to establish that. That's just how it is. Don't say, well, that's not going to happen in my class, but it can though, right? So just teach them that from the beginning. And this is a perfect time because school starts in August or September, whatever you start. It's perfect because now you can establish this and right from the beginning. Now, how many of you in here teach 5th grade? Okay. I'm going to give you all. The rest of you cannot listen. Okay. So 5th grade, do you have time to do reading groups? Or I don't know how much time in your schedule, because sometimes you don't. Okay, so I'm going to give you the little hybrid method. Okay, the rest of you don't listen. Okay. But in 5th grade, sometimes the schedule doesn't work well. So I say then still have reading time, obviously. But while the whole class is reading, every day choose a few different ones to come back to your desk and have a bit more of a meaningful conversation, or especially if they're advanced. I don't like the advanced to be left alone. They're the ones that you kind of forget about, they're fine. I'm like, no, but let's work with them, right? So do a little more with them, or if they're a little bit of a striver, you might want to read out loud to them a little bit and just kind of, I don't know, just something to kind of give a little more time with them, but you might not have time to do groups every day with 5th grade, okay? What about kindergarten? Any kindergarten teachers in here? Okay, we still want to do groups in kindergarten, but probably not till after Christmas-ish, usually. That's up to you, but not right away, at least into the 2nd quarter, but usually it's after Christmas. And they don't have to meet every day. I would say 2 to 3 times a week. And maybe for the top group, 2 to 3, maybe the lower group, 3 to 4, right? And if you're using our Focus on 5s, even though the reader looks like it happens on day 5, it's still, that's the reader for reading group time during the week, 2 or 3 times, okay? Because we're not all about decoding. Oh, well, they can say all the words, they're done. But think of all the questions you can start asking them, and especially into 2nd semester, getting them into the higher level thinking questions, right? And so that's why it's not just read it quickly, boom, you're done. Okay, well, I mean, your books are kind of easy. I'm like, but they're not, because you're going deeper. You want to start to get them into that higher level thinking. How long is reading class? Okay, so I have a question for y'all. Reading instruction should take about 60 to 90 minutes total. Okay, I know. It's very rare that anyone has 90, so I know that we won't even go to 90. Okay, what about 60? Do any of you have 60 minutes? And you're good. What about at least 45, hopefully, most of you? Okay, less than 45 is really tricky. Let's just say tricky. I don't know that it's really possible to do it really well in fourth and under less than 45 minutes, okay? Because you need time with each group. How would you do, because less than 15 minutes per group would be kind of shortchanging them. And honestly, if we're all talking honesty here, what's more important than doing your reading time, right? So if you need to reestablish different schedule, talk to your principal, whatever you need to do. But I would have to say, try, 60 is marvelous. Some states actually have a 90-minute requirement, which is, I think, the coolest thing ever. Like 90 minutes, you can just do amazing things. But that's not reality for most. But at least, hopefully 60, but if not, at least 45, okay? Let's say that. And so each group normally meets 20 to 30 or 15 if you have to. But the higher group may meet shorter, right? Because they can read faster. So then you can borrow from Peter to pay Paul. That's what makes elementary so enjoyable, I think, is that you're able to take some minutes from something here and kind of put it over here and so on, right? And so you're able to have more time with your lower group, okay? And we'll talk about that group in just a minute. So this is what I call the striving readers group, not the, oh, poor things, you know, they're struggling and we're just going to have them there forever. I want them to do better. And guess what we try to do with the strivers? We don't have time to talk to them and have discussion. We want them to just get going because it's going to take so long to read. Of all the groups, who should we spend more time making them excited about reading? Them, right? So don't just jump in and say, okay, page 10. We're just not even going to talk about it today. Well, that's not going to help them at all. Right? So a couple of quotes here. The striving reader doesn't get to show their interest and eagerness if we control it too tightly. So we don't want to have time to have a discussion at the beginning. We don't want to know how they really think because we have got to get to reading. Well, that's not good, right? So you have to change your mindset a little bit. Oh, this is great. Ask, what questions might you have about dogs? Instead of how many of you have a dog? You. Okay, good. Page 10. Well, wait, they haven't gotten to tell you their question, right? You want them to be excited. You won't get them all to answer. I don't mean that. You don't have time for the whole group to answer, but you're going to choose a different one or something like that. When students have background knowledge on a subject, research proves that students are able to read higher level texts, even when they generally read at a lower level. How many of you have noticed this? Because I don't know why this is, but it fascinates me that students that strive or struggle often love informational text more than nonfiction. Have you noticed that? Well, we know that informational text is harder though, but they're drawn in. Well, are we going to say that's actually a little hard for you, honey? Let's not worry about that one. What are you doing? You're kind of dampening their excitement. And of all the groups, we want them to be excited. Right? So don't do that. Lower level readers need to read interesting books, even if they're below their level, as in the students below the book level. And we're going to talk about levels in a minute, because we want them to read what's exciting to them, right? So give a purpose for reading. You're going to say, okay, let's turn to pages 10 to 12 in our reading books, our basal readers, and I'm going to think of some questions. Now, if you're using BJU Press, you will have a ton of questions already given to you, right? So you're already thinking, oh yeah, on that page, there's already all those different types of questions. Do you need to ask all of them? I mean, who has time for that, right? But we give you some ideas. Can you make up your own? Yes, of course you can, right? But it just helps you. I don't know about you, but some days my creative brain is gone. And if I had to think up all the questions on my own, well, I mean, the poor students would be bored and yawning because I can't be clever that day. But you choose from those. And sometimes you choose, one year it's a bunch of these questions, and next year that doesn't flow, but I go this way, or something like that, right? So you're kind of all over the place. But we help you with the thought-provoking questions. Predicting always precedes reading. So you give them something to look for. We're predicting, like, well, is grandma still in the hospital? Or do you think he found his dog? We're looking for something. To just say, read pages 10 to 12. Okay, why? Right? What's the point? So we're giving them something. So predicting, that's a really big one to always be thinking. And we help you with that. But I'm saying even on your own, you should be able to come up with something for them to predict. All right, so Comprehension questions. This is a good one, and some of you might know the answer to this, so yes. And you can see me after for a prize if you're close to this. Literal questions. Research shows that a typical teacher asks literal questions what % of the time? Whoever doesn't know this from another session can guess. 85? Okay. Who else? 50? 70? 90, 95? It was like The Price is, one of those shows. 65. Okay, so the answer, I'll tell you, and the two closest, I know one for sure is really close, but the answer is 71. Who said 70 or 75? Yes, okay, yay. So those two closest, see me after, have a surprise for you. 71% of the time. Should we ask literal questions? Yes. Why? Well, what is the point of literal? I mean, we might as well know why we're doing it if we're doing it. Okay. Shows that they've read it, right? Now, when I ask them a question, are they allowed to look back in their story? Yes. We're not expecting them to memorize the story, okay? We're teaching them to get meaning from print. Think about the application to science, to heritage studies, to math, anything like that. So I'm going to say, well, is Grandma still in the hospital? And they'll remember it's on that page. I'm going to flip through. Oh, she is still in the hospital. That's right. Oh, yeah, she is. I saw that on page whatever. That's the point. We want them to look for the answer. We want them to be able to look back. This is not a test or a quiz, okay? So we do want literal questions. However, we would rather spend more time, not instead of, but more time on higher order thinking questions, okay? This is developing their critical thinking skills. Now, those of you in kindergarten, I'm going to give you a little thing. Give yourself grace, okay? Because kindergarten students, just literal's their thing, okay? But second semester, you start to work towards higher level thinking, right? And we give you lots of those questions, but just don't expect them all to get that. One of my children was literal. I mean literal. And I'll give you an example. So I said, Benjamin, how high can you count? And he counted 1 to 10. And I thought, well, I thought he could count higher. So I said, well, Benjamin, can't you count higher? He stood up on the couch and counted 1 to 10 again. And he wasn't being funny. That's what scared me. I was like, oh, I have a literal child. And he was literal for years. I mean, years. I could go on and on with stories. So in kindergarten, just so you know, that your students sometimes are still that, like my Benjamin, and they're just not thinking higher order, but you keep trying, okay? We worked with Benjamin. But you're working on this higher order because by first grade, they're starting to, you're expecting it more, right? And at first, if they come into your classroom, by the way, from another type of program or you're switching and they're used to only literal, you have to be real patient at the beginning of the year, right? And you have to think, okay, I'm going to ask them a question, and they're going to right away look in their book. And you're going to say, actually, it's not in your book. I want you to tell me what you think. What do you think the author meant here? And they don't know what to do at first. But then they realize, oh, she actually wants to know, right? And so then you're going there. All right, let's keep going here. This is a great quote. Studies have shown that teachers see more growth in their students' reading scores when higher level thinking is stressed to students. And the quotes are out there on so many levels, but higher level thinking is just a thing, should be developed from very young. It shouldn't be all of a sudden middle school, dun-da-da, let's start thinking higher order. It's a little late then, right? You're kind of behind there. What about biblical worldview shaping? To think critically is to engage in deliberations with the intention of making a judgment based on appropriate criteria. This is what Richard Cash says. And we say the appropriate criteria should be the Bible. You are bringing their discussions back to what the Bible says. What does the Bible say? You're letting them talk, but you don't leave it hanging, with the wrong answer. Oh, time to move on. Well, no, we need to bring it back to the Bible, right? Hopefully at home, their parents are doing this with them. Is that always happening? No. I mean, honestly, a lot of parents aren't even Christians or they don't have time. So you have that special privilege. And I think it's an amazing privilege, honestly, that you do this. So you get to have this discussion. I want to show you. So in kindergarten and first grade, we're already talking about biblical worldview. We're talking about the Bible counseling, the foundation. Don't wait till middle school. I've actually had some teachers say that. Well, in our school, we don't really worry about biblical worldview shaping until middle school. That's a little late. Because did you know statistically that students by 13 have already formed their worldview? When is 13? Middle school. So are you going to wait till then? No. So we start it right away, right? And then this is second grade. I'm just jumping through a few things. And there's 4 basal readers, and you have the creation, fall, redemption, Christ's return. Third grade, you're comparing factual Bible accounts with biblical fiction. Ooh, look at this. This is from 4th grade. Confucianism. How many of you have taught this? Anyone? Amazing. Can you just, I get the goosebumps thinking about the discussion I'm going to have in my classroom the day I'm going to talk about this, right? Why would we talk about Confucianism in our books? Anyone think? Yes?
I think they're going to hear that and somewhere else, and you want to hear the information from a Christian worldview.
That's an excellent answer. Yes. Do you think they're not going to hear about this? Of course they are, right? And so why would this not be the best place where they have a Christian teacher to bring them back and say, actually, and I don't know if y'all know this, but in Confucianism, they really support children being respectful of their parents. That's huge. Is that good? Yes, it is. So gone are the days when we would just say, well, Confucianism's wrong. Okay, let's move on now. We're going to, because they're smart, and they're going to say, well, it's actually not all wrong. They know this, right? And they're going to get this from their friends or from relatives or whatever. But why not show them? Oh, there are good parts to it. Yes, you're right. But let's look at it from a biblical worldview. And we bring it back around, right? So this is fantastic. And then there's a novel that goes along with that, with these brothers following Confucianism. Make your classroom you. These are just things I did, and this is just because I'm showing you examples. This is me, but this is whatever makes you unique. So we read about owls in second grade. So we ordered owl pellets, okay? That's disgusting, folks. We had document cameras, and they would take turns coming up and tearing them, and they're like, oh, I found a skull. I'm like, that is so gross. I'm just not that way at all. But they loved it, so I couldn't act like it wasn't my thing. Wow, a skull, yay. Okay, so anyway, so we're moving on. But see, I wanted them to enjoy it, and that was not my thing, but it still was their thing. Okay, so I did that. Then we have volcanoes. And so on Teachers Pay Teachers, they had some cool things, about volcanoes and things like that. This was about the Wright Flyers and the Wright brothers, and they call it the Wright Flyer. And so at the end, we went ahead and made paper airplanes, and we had a contest. Because why not? And we threw, across the room and got prizes because that's what. And then, and this one was fun. I'm not very clever, but we talked about at Easter time, the resurrection. So that's a little treat with the empty tomb, okay? And I'm just showing you examples because you make your classroom unique, right? And whatever makes it special for you. I'm from Canada, so we did Canadian. When we talk about Canada in heritage studies, for example, it's a half page. And I'm like, no, not in my classroom. I mean, we had flags flying. I had Canadian treats. I mean, we made it the biggest deal ever because that was me, right? So because I'm from French Canada, I taught them French. They thought they were bilingual. They could, in reality, speak French from 1 to 20. That was it, but they thought, and some of them still talk about that's what they remember. I'm like, I did so many cool things. They remember that they learned French 1 to 20. I mean, so make your classroom cool and unique. Find some of these ideas, make them what makes you you, right? And that's what they remember. It's good PR because the parents are like, oh, that's cool, right? So anyway, those are just some ideas, extra ideas. All right, so we're going to actually have a group, and I want to show you what I would do. So we're going to usually divide in 3, right? How many of you have tried 4 groups? Okay, I have tried it. It was not it didn't go well, okay? 4 was a lot for me, but I'm not saying not to do 4. I guess maybe my brain's too small, but I only did 3 for most years. So group number 1, and I'll just show you the small version. I had a big old, chart with this, and it would just be, I did not name them 1, 2, and 3. That's very boring. You also don't name them low, medium, and high. Okay, low group, it's your turn. And they come back, and everyone's looking at them, right? You don't do that, okay, but whatever you name them, sometimes it's fun to let them name themselves, right? Especially with the older grades, a category, a baseball team or something like this. Or you could do, for the younger ones, little animals I have up here. Whatever makes it fun for you, just make it fun. And yes, do they figure out, they can maybe low, medium, and high, but that's not the point, and it's all how you handle it. Right? You have such a loving, great attitude towards everyone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is they're in a group. So that's what you make a big deal about. So the group number 1 is doing seat work, and I'll show you what that would mean. So they would have their reading worksheet from their reading workbook. They might have the English page from the lesson you taught them yesterday. Why not a new lesson from today? Yes, they're going to need to interrupt you because they didn't never know about a verb before in their entire lives, and you all of a sudden introduced it today, and now you're going to make them, it has to be something they've already done. Or a math page. Have them do a math page they did yesterday. Like they learned the lesson yesterday, they're doing the math page today. So they're doing their seat work. Now, notice the front of the worksheet, just so you know, this is kind of an extra little bit of information. It's often comprehension. Well, what if they haven't read the story with you yet? Right? What should you do? Well, at the very end, after we've rotated, I always gave them those few minutes for that first group to go back and finish that front page. You don't want to shortchange them just because they happen to be the first ones doing seat work. That's just an extra little thing. Can they look back in the story for the answers? Yes. It's not a test or a quiz. We are not that way. In the elementary, that's not how our philosophy is. We're trying to teach them how to get meaning from print. Yes, they can look back in the story. And so I'd always say that if you don't know the answer, open your book up, right? We're not trying to get them to, I don't remember no, that's not how it is, okay? So we have that for seat work. And what if they finish their seat work and you're still at reading group time, which didn't very often happen, but once in a while? Well, then I would have them pull out a book. My students always had to have a book in their desk, but I didn't say it like that. My students always got to have a book in their desk. They were so excited because they had a book. We always have a book in our desk. It's how you deal with it, but that you don't want them sitting there idle, because when they're idle with their friends, and then they're not idle. It's not pretty, so we do that. Okay, but where I want to spend a bit of time, and on the back of your handout, you'll see centers. I don't want centers to be what keeps you from having reading groups. Oh my word, centers, I can't do centers. Yes, you can. I'm not clever, I'm not creative. Even if my room's small, so is mine. I didn't even have, do y'all have a kidney-shaped table, some of you? I didn't have one, okay? If you do, it's great. If you don't, it doesn't matter. They can still come to reading time. And my centers were just around the room. I would have a little number 1, in fact, right here where I would teach, and I would have a little number 1 stuck on the wall. That was center number 1, center number 2, all around the room. It can be on the floor, right? The point is just it's fun to have centers, different centers, but I kind of kept, there was always a spelling center, so I didn't have to be thinking what type of center. No, it was spelling. So for instance, for the spelling center, this is just from 1 week, but I would have a list of the spelling words, and then they would spell them out on a magnet board, or as they get older, they could do something on the whiteboard, and they could get to choose a spelling word and make a mural about it, or just something fun to do. And I always had a spelling center, because why not review the words? I always had a reading center. Okay, think about this one. This is easy. Every week, just change out the books that are really cool books that everyone would love to look at, the ones that no one can get from the library because everyone wants them. They can only look at them in reading center. And they had beanbag chairs and the whole cool thing. Because it's all how you make it, right? One time, sometimes I would throw in a jigsaw puzzle because I had no time to think about centers. They thought that was the coolest thing ever, and to me it was just I didn't have time to make a center. But I'm just saying, just make it very simple. So one group is at seat work, One group is at a center. Now, in my classroom, they did not rotate during each day. They had to stay at the same center, if that makes sense. Whatever center they were at, and if they finished it, then that was fine. They could go back to their seats and read. And I have a whole bunch up here. I'm just going to hold them up. But you can get them all over the place online. And just like this is for younger kids, this was a big old game board. But see how it's plastic, and I could totally throw it around and they would play. It was about rhyming words, compound words. They would just dump these on the floor, put them together. In the older grades, there's even some cool, they're called UKNOW cards, just about context clues and things like that. You can get those online. I just made this blue and green because it was easier, but they read the paragraph and they find out the main idea. They put them together. I think it's fun sometimes to have centers partners because they can kind of work together and then they enjoy it more. There's all kinds of things. Find the maze. This maze, this is the answer key, but they just have to find the main, there's a main idea and find any kind of details that would go with that. I mean, they're everywhere. And afterwards, if you want to look at these, each week I would try to do one center having to do with whatever the story was that week. So this would be, for instance, in 5th grade, I even have this up here. Just in a minute here. Well, I guess it's a little bit further down. But this is about the chinchilla, and they read the story about chinchilla. So I just printed off something about chinchillas. This one is about Holland, which we're going to read about. So I had one. And it's just like I would just print off one, put it in a center, and they could work on the same packet. They didn't each have to have their own, right? Because that centers are very chill in my classroom. It wasn't so detailed that they couldn't keep up with it, and that was hard for me to keep up with it, so I tried to make it pretty chill. All right, so then the rest of you are reading with me from the Basel Reader, and just pretend you all are in my group, right? Before we start reading, though, I want to talk about differentiation. How do you differentiate in a group time in a Basel Reader without having leveled readers, right? I do get that question. Well, you may have to divide the story. So the story is too long for the striving group. They're struggling a little bit. So you divide it in half. So the top group is doing the whole story. The lower group does half. Well, you don't just say, well, you don't get to read the rest of it. You'll just have to keep up. Well, no, tomorrow you're going to read the other half. So now you're at different places, right? And that's okay. Lesson plans can be changed, right? The point is that they can be differentiated just within the Basel Reader. Doesn't have to be a different level. They still want to read what their fellow friends are reading, right? They have that same interest. You just have to maybe go a little bit slower. I did that for years, and it does work well. So that's a question I do get a lot. And this is what, again, from David Pearson, kids are who they are. They know what they know. They bring what they bring. Wishing they knew more, knew something different won't change things. Our job is to transform what they bring. And he's talking about grouping. When they come to the group, you need to know what they don't know, so that you can help them ready to read this story, okay? Now this is from 2nd grade. I'm only doing it from 2nd grade because there's a bit of a difference on this one, and for those of you teaching 2nd grade, the rest of you won't have this, but we will do a little phonics review in 2nd grade, and then we're going to talk about the vocabulary. This is how it is in all the grades. Always talk about the vocabulary. They won't understand the story if they don't understand the vocabulary, so you do need to take time for that. Give them some background information. For instance, this is from where the Netherlands is. Here's some pictures of the Netherlands. What would they really want to go there? I always try to have something fun, so here's some wooden shoes, right? So just something cool to make it exciting, because how many of your students have ever been to Holland? Probably nobody, right? So you have to bring Holland to them. All right, how do you do vocabulary? So we could print off these from Teacher Tools Online, which I did sometimes, and then I would actually do have a little pocket chart with the name of the story, and then they would come up and put the cards in as they would understand the word. That's one way to do it. Or we have them, and I'll show you, I think I'll have a minute afterwards, but we have every story in our reading books, we have a PowerPoint for them. So that's already made for you. It's amazing, right? So that's another way you can do it, but whatever works for your personality. All right, so here we're back to the story. They understand the dike. The dike is part of the story, so they need to understand what it looks like. I explain that to them, and then we're ready to go. Remember, we're predicting. Think as you read. What problems does the boy have in this story? How are the problems solved? I need them to be looking for that, right? You're not just saying, okay, go ahead and read. They're like, what? Why? Right? So you're giving them a reason. So since you are my reading group, I'm going to have you read pages 70 and 71, which is these 2 pages, and find out where Jan lives. All right, so I'll give you a minute to read, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and this is how you would do a reading group. Yes?
In 5th grade, I gave them a purpose to read, they find it, they stop. They find the answer to that, because I mean, it's in the first sentence. They would not continue.
Right, so you're going to have to be clever and give them a purpose down the road a little bit, you know, on page 3 or whatever. Yeah, that's good. 5th graders are very clever, actually. Yeah. Now, when my students were reading, I was always reading at the same time to pace, right? Whatever. So if they had to smile at me when they were done. They couldn't do this. I'm done. Because then that's kind of bothersome to everybody. But if I was reading and I felt a smile on my head, I'm thinking there's no way they're done. I'm way older than 7 and I'm still reading. So I would always say to them, okay, go ahead and read it again. Maybe you'll learn something else, right, while they're doing that. So I would read, but I haven't done that with you. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask you some questions. Tell me the answer and then tell me if it's literal or higher order. Okay, make it a little trickier for you. All right, so where does Jan live? Holland, and is that literal? Okay, so remember, we've given all the background information, we've done the vocabulary, we're just whipping through because I know you know all these things, but you're ready to go now. They're reading at first silently. I've had teachers say, oh, but they just don't do really well with that. That's a skill, folks. You reading to them takes that skill away. They've got to, for the rest of their lives, they don't have a teacher walking beside them reading to them. They've got to learn how to get information from print. So don't be sad for them. Oh, but that's hard for them. No, it won't be. You'll just work with them. Okay, so they read silently. You're asking, that was literal. Good. All right, what is the gravel road like? Now, remember gravel, you didn't know this probably in passing. It was a vocabulary word. So how would you describe the gravel road? Bumpy, because we probably learned that, right, from the vocabulary part. So, and then also, then it says he walked down the gravel road along the dike. They might say it was a long walk or something like that. So that would be literal, or that would be, what the gravel road's like, that would be higher order, right? Because they had to put a bunch of information together, right? So you've asked a literal, you've asked a higher order. What about this one? This is interesting. Do you have a special name for your grandmother? It's higher order because I don't know, and it's not in here, so I would probably let them all answer. They don't tell me about what their great uncle said about their grandmother, or they all have a story, but we just go down the road, right? Okay, one more to ask you. Do you like to hear stories that your grandparents or other family members tell? What are the stories about? And you're like, I don't have time for that. What are they thinking, right? But don't ignore those questions. That's higher order. But I might let one person, I might say, I'm going to let you answer. And the rest of you that they all want to answer, because they all have a story, I'll say, well, when I'm on recess duty, why don't you come tell me your story? Or have them turn and talk. Or some of them, I've had teachers say they go back and write the story, a little answer. There's all the ways to do it. Just don't ignore that. But you don't ask all the questions either, okay? And I'm going to show you, these are the types of questions. Sometimes in some grades they tell you what type of higher order question, and other times it'll just say higher order or literal. Okay, so we're going to flip through the story. I wanted to show you how long this is. This is 2nd grade, right? So you probably would have to divide this for your striver. But look at this, for your advanced readers, you can go deeper. This is great. Just because they can read it fast, that doesn't matter. You want them to go deeper. Right? All right, so one last thing here before we finish up real quickly. But I wanted someone to come up with a higher order question for this one sentence. A fat black cat sat on the big box, and you're like, how on earth would you do higher order? All I'm going to say is, what color was the cat? You know, whatever. Who can come up with one? Yes?
Why do you think the cat
Right. Why? That's a great answer. Why? Why do you think why is the cat fat? Right? If you start getting your brain in that world, it's amazing what higher order questions you can come up with, just even for those of you teaching kindergarten, right? So then you would rotate, right? Now, before you would rotate, and I'm not doing this for time's sake, but after they read silently and you have discussion, then I would have them read orally. You know, you'll read the paragraph about where the boy is from. You'll read the paragraph about where grandmother is. But we don't read orally for the most part until they've read it silently. Okay? That's just fair. That's how we all like to be. That's just fair. So you've read it silently, you've had a discussion, then you read it orally. You won't get the whole story read, but you get bits and pieces here and there. And then just for oral reading, avoid round robin reading, and I'm just going to whip through this part. Correcting miscues, you have to decide what you want to do about it, right? How you want to really get after them or just let them go. If it's just pretty much the meaning, you don't have to correct every little detail. What about reading homework? I want to touch on this before we finish. In the lower grades, I think it's great if they can take home the story they read to you today in school and read it to their parents at night. We put it in a folder. We had a little chart on the front, pages 3 to 5. The parent had to sign that. And then they came back and they got a little colorful candy, right? I called them power pellets. And they thought getting one of these was the grandest thing they've ever had. They would cry if they didn't. I'm not joking. So whatever motivates you. Now in the older grades, they might not need to do that. And I'm not a big proponent of homework, so that's just something. But I wanted to show you. And for the younger ones, they can choose a book from your little classroom library and take home a little note that says, your child chose this book for you to read to them tonight. Right? And then sign and return. Because we're trying to help parents read to their children. They don't always tend to do that. And then these 3 areas to assess, I'm only putting it up here to show you there's a whole session on assessing the final grade. Some of you have already been to my session on how to assess, and that's what would come next, and I'll be doing that again soon, and it's also on Teacher Tools Online. All right, so let me get to the last slide here, and Brian's going to come up here and thank you so much for your attention. Y'all were great participators.
Great information. Thank you so much. We've got a ton of questions.
Oh, okay.
And we're never going to hit them all,
Okay.
so maybe you could hit some online later on.
Okay. Yep,
but
I will.
do we have any questions here? Yes, second row. We got a mic coming your way.
Do you rotate your groups through all 3 every day, or is it?
That is a great question. Yes. I tried, and what grade are you talking about? First. I try to hit all the groups every day, except for that one day a week that I decided to do whole group, just because, why not? So, yes, if I'm going to do one, I'm going to do 3. And it's just in the schedule. It flows because, see, one's doing seat work, one's doing centers, one's doing time with me. We just rotate. And so we do that. Yes. Great question. Oh, sorry, he's coming. He's getting his exercise. Thank you, Ben. Oh, okay.
Do you recommend peer reading?
So this is my opinion, but how we did peer reading was when we did a novel, because we did get to novels, I tried to do that from our book links or our novel studies. During that time, I did a lot of peer reading. And I made that a little more casual. And yes, so I did do that then. That was just how I did it, but you could do it in different ways, yeah. I know we have a question here
Ben,
up
we got one
front
up here.
Thank you, that was a great question. Okay.
I'm new to the curriculum, so I'm just curious, is there a whole group reading lesson or instruction for each day, or is it only the groups?
That's a great question. No, and I probably didn't touch on that enough. In our product, we don't need to do both. And that's not, so if you do whole group, it's once a week maybe. But for the most part, it's groups, and you cover I didn't even get to talk about all the things you cover, but you cover the literary things and the skills and the strategies and the genres and all that. I just was talking so much about the grouping part. But you do that all in your group time and the story that you read, so you don't need to do both. That's a lot to do both, the whole group and the small groups. Yeah, great. I'm glad you asked that.
We'll take an online question here. Can you explain the nuances between guided reading and small group instruction reading?
Yeah, so,
Differences.
well, and that's, I think it depends on who, what they're meaning by that, because there is that whole side of that guided instruction. I'm just going to stick with what we do, which is the small group instruction. And so the way I described it is what we would recommend. And so I'm not going to really try to, because I've read enough about it, and every little group has their own meaning to that. So I'd really want to have that discussion with that person. Yeah.
All right. Can you compare what you like about group reading versus whole class reading?
Oh my, well, there's not really a comparison, because again, back to the small groups, you have so much more time with them, and you have the chance for them to answer more questions. You get to know them. They get to read orally pretty much every day. And whereas if it's whole class, there's no way, right? You're doing the whole, it's just 25 and I'm trying to get them all in. There's so many advantages to doing small group that there's just no, I don't know, there's too many advantages to talk about, but I definitely, as you can tell, leaning towards the small group part.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Any more questions in here that you're just dying to ask? Going once. All right, we'll take another online question.
Okay.
Are there grade levels where grouped reading is more or less helpful?
That's a good question. So like I told the whole 5th grade thing, a lot of times by 5th grade they don't have time in their schedule. And so if you don't have time, but honestly, some teachers are like, well, after 2nd grade they really don't need it, but they do, and the research shows they do, for the same reasons, to have that more time with the teacher, to go deeper. Right? You're trying to develop their critical thinking skills in every subject, and reading's a great place. And so you can go deeper, you can talk about those questions more than if it's the whole class and you're trying to get everything in. It's not, so I just don't see why you would stop groups in 2nd grade, because I know I get that a lot, Brian, but that I don't agree with that part. So
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Is it ever helpful to have strong readers with weaker readers and vice versa, or always have the strong ones with the strong and
I think it's good to mix it up. That's why even on that one slide I said sometimes change it up a little bit, and just and what the lady in the room was asking earlier about that peer reading. I think that's good to do that one sometimes. It's good for the stronger ones too. And I would just divide them purposefully, right? I would make sure there was a strong reader in with some weaker ones so that it wasn't all weaker. And we would divide up and we would do cool things, and they would take turns, but the strong reader was there to kind of help them, right, when the weaker ones struggled a little bit more. So I think that you can do both. And for the most part, especially in the younger grades, I think it's better to divide ability-wise until we get to that same point. But as they get older, there's all kinds of different ways to divide groups, and I don't think there's just one way.
All right,
Yeah.
Good. We have an online question that what are some great ideas of what students can do in seat work while the others are in group reading?
Yes, so like I said before, anything that you've taught that's not new, because if it's new, they're going to need you, right? It's just the way it is. So anything from yesterday, even if it's a spelling page that you're working on that week, any those types of papers, and if you're using our product, Teacher Tools Online, for instance, in English, there's reviews pages, and so I'm going to print those off for the year. And if I taught lesson 22 yesterday, then I'm probably going to give them lesson 22, a little black and white sheet from Teacher Tools Online during seat work, and they're going to work on that because we already reviewed it yesterday. They're just going to be doing it, so it's just something that's not too new to them. Because if it's too new, they need me. I can't have them need me right then. So
We'll do one more.
Okay.
If your class is pretty much all on the same academic level, is it still good to have group reading?
yes, and you all probably heard that enough, right? That just because you have more time with them, right? Even if they're all the same level, we're happily average this year. It doesn't matter. We still need that time so that I can pull them out and just have that more time with them. It's just the whole goal is to help them be as successful as possible, right? And that's just going to work better when I have more time with each of the groups.
All right. Thank you so much. Take note. Groups is the password, both online and here. Take note of that. But thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.